Okay, everybody, so we're going to work on PFSense and our firewalls ITSY 2401 Lab 1 walkthrough. So what we're going to need is we're going to need VMware Workstation. You're going to have some basic networking knowledge, a PFSense version ISO, and a Windows OS. Windows, it could be 7, 8, 10, 8.1. Don't use XP, don't use Vista. It would just be beneficial to you to use 7, 8, or 10. But what we're going to do on your host computer, this is your physical laptop, desktop, whatever it may be. If you're doing this on a Mac, it's going to be a little bit more complicated simply because I don't know the steps through VMware Fusion, but it is possible. You just have to follow this and sort of tailor it to Fusion instead of Workstation like we're going to be doing. So we're going to start with a NAT that comes off of your virtual network. So your first input to the host computer will be through Ethernet or it'll be wireless. Either way, it's going to have an input to the virtualized VMware workstation. We do NAT for a one quick and easy reason is that it's the most flexible. It's going to be through DHCP, and your IP address may vary here. For my particular machine, you'll see 192.168.204.128. Your probably last two octets will differ. All right, it could be 192.168.199. It could be 205. It could be anything in the last two octets. That's not our concern. We will go over when you save it to a USB hard drive. The reason why we're leaving this as DHCP is that the possibility for the IP address NAT DHCP could change, right? So on your home laptop or your home desktop, it could be 205, and then when you take it to school, it could be 204. If we static set that, it won't be as transportable or movable. The reason that we do that is so we can, it's more flexible. If we static set that, then we would not expect this virtual configuration to ever change. And in a production environment, say at a business or maybe even at your home, this is fine, static set that. But for today's lab and for future labs with PFSense, we're going to leave that to be flexible. However, on our other side of our firewall, so we have our firewall set here, right? On the internal side, this is called the external or WAN side. The internal LAN side, so NAT is occurring from WAN to LAN. So VMware and PFSense are going to essentially NAT it again a second time through PFSense. And this is where we start our quote unquote production network. And we're going to change it from VMNAT to VMNet3. So we're going to need two Ethernet interfaces on our PFSense virtual machine, which we'll go over today. The DHCP setup, which we'll again go over on our setup, will be a 10.0.0.0.24 subnet. The reason we're doing this is to make it completely differentiable between 192 and 10 dot. The routing will happen inside PFSense, so it'll know to take it from EM2 to EM1 when we finish or finalize our setup in Lab 2. Lab 1 is just building the actual virtual machines inside that. So your Windows could be Windows 7, 8, or 10. We talked about that. Your virtual machine, which we'll go through how to set that up. I won't be downloading it. I'll show you where to get the download links because downloading it, you'd just be watching me sit here for 10, 15 minutes. That's kind of pointless. So again, we're going to need VMware Workstation for this. You'll need to download PFSense, and they're at version 2, so you can get 2.4.4, that's the most recent, or 2.4.2 or 2.4. I can't remember my other versions. We'll look at them. I have them available for download. Windows operating systems, again, your choice. We're only considered or concerned about a browser like a Windows Internet Explorer or Windows Edge, or you can even go and download Chrome or Firefox. If you already have another Windows operating system virtualized, that's fine. You can just point your interface to it. However, it will probably be better that you keep this with your PFSense, flip-flopping back and forth. Sometimes virtual machines and VMware gets a little sticky. So after we download our operating systems, we'll install them, and you want to do it in a specific order. Try PFSense first. Install PFSense first, because there's an automatic configuration that can help you, but you'll need to, before you start the virtual machine, make sure you install your virtual machine, your second virtual NIC. Then we'll install Windows. So PFSense first, then Windows. You can start PFSense and then start the OS install for Windows, which is what I'm going to be doing because it's a little bit faster. We don't have to take so long. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, sure. And then we will come over to our course, and we'll pull up our firewalls class. Inside our firewalls class, we're looking for files, right? This is for chapter or lab 2 PFSense. In our files link, we want to look at this link here for a Google Drive. You can look at this as just more information about PFSense. It's an 8-part series. It's pretty good, but it's not exactly what we're going to be doing. So inside our Google Drive, we're looking for PFSense. We have 2.3.4, 2.3.5, and 2.4.2. You can also, if you don't want to try that one and you want to get the most current, you can go to the PFSense website and select download. This is 2.4.4-P1. Make sure to select 64-bit because we're virtualizing this. We don't have the NetGate architecture or hardware, all right? So we're going to choose the ISO installer. Again, we don't have NanoBSD hardware, and we don't have hardware that we're going to install this through a memory stick. We'll just use the ISO. Choose your location and then choose download, all right? Again, not going to download it because I already have it. After you get PFSense, either from here, we can then move over to the Windows or Microsoft client that we'll need, 8, 7, 10, 10, 7, 8. Don't choose Windows XP. That's not for this lab. Choose Windows 10. If you want Windows 10, here's Windows 10 Education. Right-click, download. Also, don't forget you'll need this Windows 10 key if you want to continue to hold this on. If you don't get the key, don't worry about it because we're not going to really utilize Windows operating system for anything more than a browser to configure and sort of play around in. After you get your files, make sure you read the lab itself. The lab itself, we're concerned with configuring virtual machines to have one PFSense firewall and one operating system of your choice, Windows 7, 8, 10. There is a link for the manual, and once you get done with this lab, you'll need to take a screenshot inside the virtual machine for your Windows, showing that you can access and configure your PFSense firewall. The default login, you can find that either through the manual or with this helpful link right there. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I already said, like I've downloaded Windows 10. We have both 2.4 and 2.4.2. All right. It's important to note that these PFSense files come GZ'd. All right, they're actual compressed files. All right, and to uncompress this archive, you can download WinRAR. It's free, or you can download 7-zip. Either one will work. All right, so we're going to extract 2.4.2 with 7-zip. You can also do it with WinRAR. All right, so now we have an ISO. Now we can actually utilize it in Workstation. So we'll go ahead and open up Workstation. And what I like to do is create a folder. So that I can house my virtual machines a little more organized. We'll call this folder Firewalls. And we'll create a new virtual machine. We'll choose Custom. We'll leave everything default. This again is very handy, right? So I have 8 terabytes of virtual disk size. These are my limitations: 10 network adapters, 16 processors, and 64 gigs of memory. This is what I can work with. If I try and go over 64 gigs of memory, it will slow down severely. If I try and go over 16 processors, again, slow down severely. If I try and add more than 10 network adapters, it won't work at all. So we'll go with the ISO. That's the ISO we created earlier, which I have on my desktop. We're looking at that 2.4.2. If it detects the ISO, great. If it doesn't, we're using it as a FreeBSD. So we'll need to choose Linux and look for FreeBSD. FreeBSD. And this version here, we can just choose 11. Actually, I think it's 10 and earlier. So we'll choose 10 and earlier. And we are going to label this, instead of it being the FreeBSD, the one that loaded, we're going to call it Free PFSense. And you can go ahead and label it your version if you want. At this point in time, if you choose to save it in your documents, virtual machines, you can, or you can choose to save it in, say, a USB drive to make it portable. All right. PFSense by itself does not need a lot of processor power, so choose one. You can up this if you want, but for the most part, one processor is pretty fast. I like to bump it up to 1 gig of memory, but again, I had 26 or 28 available, 27.7 or 32. I had 32, but 27.7 is available. I'll have plenty of memory left over to play with after I finish this. You can leave it at 512. I like to bump it up just a hair to make it a little faster. Again, we're going to leave it at NAT, but we're going to add another network adapter. Everything else will stay default, default, default. We don't need 20 gigs. I like to change it, half it down. But this is for that FreeBSD. This install, if you remember how big this ISO is, it's 500 megs. After it installs, it'll be a little bit bigger, but nowhere near 20 gigs. So we can crank that down to 5 or even 2 gigs if you want. Everything else will be default. And again, we're going to take our virtual disk, 10 gig virtual disk, we're going to change that to our USB drive. All right? If you don't want to, you don't have to. You can transfer it afterwards because it's all going into your documents inside a virtual machines folder. It hasn't been created yet, but it will go there. So it's going to create that virtual machines. Before you finish, don't click finish, customize your hardware, and we'll need to, we don't have any sound cards, so we're going to remove that. We're going to add a network adapter. We're going to add that network adapter, and instead of it both being NAT, this won't work. It's looping back into itself. We need to choose another network adapter. I like VMnet 3. You don't have to use VMnet 3. What we're going to do, based off that earlier presentation we looked at, is take it from NAT to VNet 3 to Windows. So it's a step-by-step process. We don't need to do anything else. Make sure everything is connected at power on. Sometimes when you reboot on your CD, DVD, it will disconnect, or sometimes it will go back to using this ISO image and look like it tries to reinstall. VMware is a little sticky like that. After you're done installing it, I like to either eject the disk or use the physical drive. I don't have a physical drive on my laptop. You might, so if there's something in there, it may try to run it. For the most part, you can take the disk out or just ignore it. Now that we have NAT and VMnet 3, we're still making sure this is set. We can close this, finish this. It'll take a few minutes to create that virtual machine. Put it in your firewalls directory. All right, when we power on this machine, we'll start the install process. Click OK on all that. And as we go through the install process, leaving it alone, we'll choose Boot Multi-User. And we'll start the install process. While it's starting, we're going to create another virtual machine, and that will be our Windows virtual machine. Now, keep in mind what you have to work with. It says 64 gigs of memory, but I used one with PFSense, so I have 63 available for use. We'll choose a OS of our choice, Windows 10 Education. Windows 10 is operated or it's detected, and we'll use Easy Install. This is where that product key comes in handy. We'll grab our product key. And for our full name, we'll just leave it as admin. I don't put a password because you'll have to remember your password. If you forget your password, you'll have to crack your password, which this video doesn't go over. Virtual machine, again, if you're using a USB drive, make sure you select that. Everything default. Now I like to change this up a little bit more. So again, I have 16 cores. If you don't, you might want to maybe crank that not so high, right? If you only have 4 cores, you've already used up one. You can sort of overdo it a little bit. And again, we're going to crank our RAM up just a slight bit. All right. Recommended for Windows 10 is 2 gigs. If you've ever played around in a Windows operating system with 2 gigs of RAM, you know how slow it can be. So this will help us in the long run by just cranking it up a little bit. We won't worry about this at the moment, right? Because we'll need to make sure we change this. So we'll slap that as regular, or default. And then here again, we don't need 60 gigs. We'll slash that down to 20. Make sure you, again, if you're using USB drives, put that in your USB drive. And then we're going to customize our hardware again. And our network controller is going to go to VNet 3. That's from one side, NAT. From the left to right, we're going NAT, PFSense EM1, or yep, then EM2, VNet 3 to Windows 10. That's the version I chose, to VNet 3 feed. It's feeding through VNet 3. All right, once I've set all that up, we'll close this, we'll finish this, double check and make sure that your network adapter shows VNet 3, and you can again look at your last settings for anything else. Click finish, it'll power on, and at the same time install PFSense and Windows 10 at the same time. I'm only doing this for purposes of making this video shorter. After the PFSense is creating after Workstation has created PFSense and Windows 10, we'll be able to configure or continue our installation and configuration of PFSense. All right. So here it is. I like to drag it, keep things organized. So now I have my firewalls here. So we'll come back to PFSense. Because we use the easy setup, most of the Windows installation will be taken care of for us. All right. So Windows is starting. We'll come back to PFSense and we'll continue our PFSense installer. Now it's not really a GUI. we get a little bit of menus, but for the most part, we're going to have to use our keyboard. So um, select into your virtual machine screen. Right now, I'm not selected into it. If you're in it, you want to remove your mouse from it. See, I'm moving my mouse and you can't see anything. You'll have to Control-Alt to release your mouse, and you can come check on, say, Windows 10 install and see we got easy installing Windows 10. It'll pretty much do most of the grunt work for us, clicking, time zone, creating an account, that kind of stuff. It'll all be done. By the time we're done with PFSense, it should be close to finished. Maybe a little bit of input from us. Okay, so we'll accept. We'll choose Install PFShell or PFSense. This is some additional features. And what we're looking for here is to make sure our keyboard is USB keyboard map. If you don't see it, you can go down and select it. It's closer towards the bottom. And again, we don't have, there it is there. We don't have mouse configurations here, so we have to use our up, down, left, right keyboards. Configure with default map. We'll do the guided disk setup. If we had a larger shell or a larger machine to install this on, we could partition out things, but for the most part, we have a gig, and we can partition a gig, but it's not really necessary. Or maybe it was, no, that was the RAM. Yeah, so I think we squished down our install. They wanted 20 gigs. We shrunk that down quite a bit. As we go through our install process here, it won't take very long. You can see how fast it's reading. Because it's all virtualized, things go pretty fast at 250 files a second. We'll come back, check on our Windows installation, finish off our Windows operating system selection. That's because of the education version. If you had Windows 7 Pro or Home, it wouldn't give you that option. But education is a little different. So it'll finish installing. It probably won't get updates because we're going through VMnet 3, not NAT, NET. And we're close to finishing on PFSense. If this is too small for you to read, there are some virtual machine options for you here. All right, we have our shutdown, startup, restart, power off, suspend, reset. We have the ability to take snapshots, which is a way to back up our virtual machines. We'll do this after we install, not right now. It would make sense to come back to this install screen. If you want to see this bigger, if this is too small, we can make our set full screen, which at the resolution it's set now, it's not so large, and we can change our resolution by changing our native resolution to say, this is going to look pretty awful, but we'll set it to say 800 by 600. And then when we come back to our virtual machine, it's a lot bigger. All right. Or actually on that set there, it's not as big because it's the manual settings I have for this recording session. So we'll change that back. I have it set to 1080p. Sorry about that. But again, if you wanted to see it bigger on your side, you could change your resolution. Now we'll reboot, and this is the portion where I like to make sure that disk gets removed, because sometimes as you go rebooting things, it will like to go back through and try and reinstall. So you can remove the connecting boot disk, or you can, once it's shut down or fully loaded, you can come back over and select the physical drive. Again, just getting it away from that ISO. We see it go through. This is installed, basically. We have an additional option to reboot. So the OS is installed for PFSense. You can also choose this finish installing. option. It does the same thing where it tries to remove this file or disconnect it. But I like to hands-on do it. We'll come back over, check in the installation, 30% done of installing. And we're not going to install VM tools for PFSense because it's mainly a command line interface where we're not really going to need drag and drop or enter selectability with VMware in our host machine. All right, and as you start looking through this right here, I know we've called it FreeBSD, but if you're not familiar with uh, FreeBSD, note the libraries that you're seeing and the directory structures and some of these names you might be seeing. All right, it should look familiar to you in the fact that it's a Linux-based operating system. So if you're comfortable with Linux, you can do many configuration changes through a command line. You can also SSH into it. It has its own SSHD server. Notice it has DNS, PF logs or PFSense firewall logs. There's also OpenVPN. Additional settings we can do with that. When it comes up, we'll take a look at what this firewall can do and how to finish configuring it. For the most part, initial configuration will be done in lab 2, which is the one we're doing right now. The next lab will look into actually doing firewall blocking and firewall management. So here we are in this set. If you happen to have a number pad like my particular laptop does, and you start using it, these funny characters are simply because I have not pushed the num lock. You have to do this every single time. So it becomes a little bit annoying. Just sort of remember, anytime you leave this virtual machine, you'll have to hit your num lock again. All right, so one of the things we want to make sure we're looking at right away is that our two network interfaces, EM0 and EM1, it may be 1 and 2. Just keep in mind EM0 and EM1. We have a WAN and a LAN side. The WAN is supplied by our NAT, which is 192.168.17.131 on a /24. This will probably change, and that's what we want because as we move it from desktop to laptop, laptop to desktop, desktop to HCC or your school, it just works out better. The internal one, we're going to static set because EM1 is always going to feed our VNet 3, which is what feeds Windows 7, 8, 10. We will make changes to that. So what we're going to do first is we're going to assign interfaces. We're going to do that through option 1. And we can also see that we have our MAC addresses as well, these virtual MAC interfaces. So we're not going to set up VLANs. You could if you wanted to. So we're going to say no to VLAN. We're going to set up EM0 as our WAN interface. All right, and we're going to set the LAN interface EM1. Sometimes you can do automatic, sometimes it'll work out. For the most part, it's easier to configure it manually. It should show these. If you flip-flop it, this will fix it as well. You can come back in here and change these interfaces. We'll proceed yes. If you confuse your interfaces and you find that you don't have internet access, switch your EM01 with LAN WAN. So EM1 would be WAN and EM0 would be LAN. Again, if you don't have access. We're going to test it here in just a second. All right, now that our interfaces have been set, they were set this way originally. This is just part of the setup to make sure we do it right. We can actually go to shell, and if this looks familiar, it's the exact same command structure that Linux is. So we can ping google.com to verify that we do in fact have internet connections. I'm working off wireless, so my ping times are a little high based on my location to my wireless access point. When you're done testing to make sure you can ping and you do have internet connectivity, you can exit and we'll come back to this screen. We'll set up the IP address interfaces through option 2. WAN 1 is already set DHCP EM0. We don't have to worry about that. But LAN 2, we're going to configure LAN 2. And for our PFSense internal LAN address, we're going to select 10.0.0.1. The bit count, we're going to set it in a 24-bit. You can set it smaller if you want. Here's some options and examples. 8, 16, 24. We're concerned with the last octet at 24. We're not going to enter a WAN address or a gateway. For LAN, we're going to press none, so we're going to hit enter. LAN IPv6, we're not going to use IPv6. We're going to hit enter. We're going to enable DHCP on LAN, so hit yes. And the starting address will be 10.0.0. I like to start a little bit above, a little bit of space, 5. You don't have to, you can do 2, but I think it's easier to just sort of separate it a little bit. 10.0.0.0.254. The last 255 is your broadcast address, so you can't use that anyways. This is just going to be, we're going to say about 239 clients or 49 clients that allows us to add to this network. And inverting to, do you want to revert to HTTP as the web configurator protocol? You can say yes or no. There's another option we can look at, and Lab 3, the second lab series for PFSense. We're going to say yes because it will take HTTPS to HTTP. It just makes for it a little easier conversion. So it'll finish doing all that. Once you see 10.0.0.1, that's the address for the web configurator, the URL, the GUI interface URL. That makes it a little easier to configure. So we'll hit enter and we're brought back to this screen. For the most part, we're done in here. If you ever forget anything, if you want to reset it or go back to factory defaults, option 4. If you forget the admin password, option 3. If you want to reboot or shut it down, 6. If you want to set some ping commands or go into shell, pftop, if you're familiar with top in Linux, that is its top rows running processes. In PFSense, it's something different. Please explore it. It's interesting. All right, you can restart the web configurator, check shells, update from console, secure shell enabling. All right, so we'll go ahead and enable that as well. I've got to reactivate in there. We're going to enable it. And now we can secure shell in from our LAN or WAN interface. We can change that again. So it's enabled. We can update it as well, or we can update it from the shell using the yum update command. Whatever option you want to choose from, you can also do update from console. You can also update it in the GUI. All right, we'll check on our Windows install. Almost finished, because that's what we're waiting on now. We're waiting on the ability to come in to Windows and go 10.0.0.1. We set our WAN interface, we set our LAN interface, so we should get an address in the subnet 10.0.0.x, starting at 5, ending at 254. So if you get an address that's anything other than the LAN address set 10.0.0.5 to 254, you did something wrong. Go back and review. There is a little bit of a bug. It's not really so much a bug. I think it's a Windows caching problem. That if you decide to go in and you go to 10.0.0.1 and it works and you close the window and try and go back to 10.0.0.1, it doesn't open and you may think you've broken something. You haven't. What happens is the cache has an HTTPS issue There's a few ways to solve that. You can clear your cache and cookies, or you can get another browser. To get another browser, remember, you're not really connected to the internet. You're connected through VM3, and PFSense is not configured as of full yet. So what you'll have to do is change it from VNet 3 to NAT, and that can be done pretty simply by, let's exit out of full screen here. Coming over settings, changing your network adapter, here we're on VNet 3, and selecting back to NAT. That will allow you to download Firefox or Google Chrome. We're about 35 minutes in here to this whole install. And we can see that the adapter's set. We can see disk usage. We have a floppy. I probably should have gotten rid of that. And that the disk is in use. You can see it blinking, and the hard drive is 20 gigs. We do have audio, but for whatever reason, we're not really going to use it. So actually, while we are waiting on Windows 10 to finish and get ready, this is a good point in time to talk about snapshots. So we've gone through the install process. We've gone through configuring WAN and LAN and configuring the IP interfaces. Okay, now is a good time to create a snapshot. So when we create a snapshot, we'll take snapshot one. Maybe we'll call it PFSense install, and we can say install complete. WAN LAN interfaces chosen, and IP address configured. All right, we'll take our snapshot a couple of seconds later. Since this is such a small operating system, it happened very quickly, but you'll see a little progress meter go across it sometimes. Now, if we look at our configuration sets, we're here. That was our install. We can take a look at our notes. We can auto protect it if we want, so we don't accidentally delete it. If we wanted to, we could clone that snapshot. We could take additional snapshots, or we can delete it if we have too many snapshots or not enough room on your drive anymore. This is where we are now. That's where we were then. Hopefully we're done here. Looks like we're close to done. We're just booting into the OS. We're restarting. Yeah, we're restarting. So install for Windows is finished. We'll probably see a little Windows easy install is finished, and then probably give us the option to remove the disk with that quick button. So essentially where we're sitting right here now, we are going to pretend we're in our production network. It could be anything you choose. It could be inside a business or inside your personal home. The network interfaces that you can add to PFSense can be a lot. You can use a lot of people you see using Celerons. It does not take a lot of processing power to run PFSense. It is an open source operating system, so it doesn't cost you anything to do this with. You just have to be able to have more than one network interface. I wouldn't suggest using wireless. It's a little bit more complicated, just because in PFSense you have to join that wireless network, and the way that happens isn't so easy. You'd have to you'd have to do it in virtual machines, and I just wouldn't recommend going to a wireless interface inside to a virtual machine, then outside the virtual machine to a physical network address. It's just too many hops, and your operating system is being worn down by running a Windows OS or a Linux OS, then the virtual machine settings. It's easier to have a desktop with multiple NICs. And NICs are pretty cheap. Network interface cards are pretty cheap. You could buy a 4 NIC interface card for roughly $50. I mean, you don't have to have 4. But if you chose to have, say, streaming on one network, game systems like PlayStation, Xbox on another network, or even VoIP or uh, network for data, like browsing the internet, you could segregate out each of those networks and sort of apply QoS packet scheduling to that as well. So we'll get greeted by our handy dandy little windows. I thought it just did this, so it's going to make us do it again. All right. Because we didn't use a password, and we don't have anything stopping us, it's just going to log us in. Now, the default resolution is probably pretty low. Now I'm set to 1080p on my physical machine. The virtual machine itself will probably be a little lower than 1080p. We can change that, and I'll go through how to do that here in just a second, because it'll be like squished in there, and I like to have it a 1-to-1 ratio instead of this sort of squished ratio. Maybe I should have chose Windows 7 to be a faster install. This is highly boring. I'm sorry. In post-production, hopefully I can speed this process. So while it's continuing to load, we'll go ahead and update from console. Because we verified our ping connectivity earlier, it'll pretty much go through. I did 2.4.2, and the most current release is 2.4.4. So we'll see quite a bit of updating happening here. We'll need to process 510 packages. So this will take a little bit, which is good, because this Windows is taking forever here. So updating metadata. Here is all these packages. It's updating bind tools, BNS map, CA root. That's for your security certificates, curl, DNS mask, XPack filter DNS, glib, host IP. There's more up there as well. It's going to require 81 megs or 106 megs download. We're going to install 59 packages. 49 will be upgraded and 1 package will be reinstalled. So if we hit enter because the N is capitalized, it will default to no. So don't do that. Hit yes, hit enter. If you have 2.4.4, your upgrade takes less time. If you have 2.4.2, it takes a little longer. So this is all our settings and our services that are being updated. And when, for the most part, very needed, especially if we're going to use OpenVPN, which I plan on setting that up because there's a host to client and a client to client VPN that we can, I'm sorry, a host to client and a host to host VPN labs that we can run through on this, which is pretty exciting. All right, here we are. So yes, we're going to allow to be discovered by other networks. And if we look, we have no network or no internet address, no internet access. And it looks like it just installed VMware tools and is restarting. Probably part of that easy setup. If you decide that something screwed up in our update, remember we have our install. All right, so if the update screws up your settings or it doesn't work after your update, you can always go back. That's one of the reasons I didn't install, update, then screenshot or snapshot. We can snapshot after the update. And because it's a relatively small install, it doesn't take up a lot of disk space. If you look in this view, the way we have this current install and setup, the Windows 10 tab has the resolution is so big you have to scroll left and right, and I kind of don't like that. So that's why we go into full screen mode. You can change the order of your library. If you want it to show up here, go away. So upgrading our kernel now, 2.4.2 to 2.4.4_2. That's where we're ending up at. For the most part, all our configurations and settings are the same. So we've got the 192.168.1731/24 and the 10.0.0.1/24 and EM0 and 0.1 respectively with WAN and LAN. All right, and it's probably going to reboot here, and that's fine. Come back and check on our Windows 10. Yeah, so we're rebooting PFSense. Shows our 1 gig of memory that we left. It's only using 638K so far for BIOS. All right, so now we're in our interface for Windows 10, and we'll wait for that to finish loading after it finished installing at 50 minutes average. I think I'm using a lot of disk right now on my host machine. I don't have an SSD on this laptop. I have a regular, probably 5400 RPM drive because it's default from the manufacturer. I didn't really upgrade this OS. So we're going to take a look at our network here. And once PFSense reboots and finishes rebooting, and we get back at that menu screen where it had the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options, we should have the DHCP service giving us an address. There we go. So we'll take a look at our network connection. And we have a 10.0.0 default gateway with a 10.0.0.5. Let's double check and make sure it is up. Oh, looks like we're still running installations. So as it sits right now, this is probably what it remembers, and we wouldn't be able to access our default gateway. Let's see our bytes and everything going through. All right, so all we're doing is proving that we don't have internet address or internet accessibility. Through ping, you're going to see it come up here that we're going to fail to go to the startup page for Microsoft. That's fine. We understand that we haven't finished setting up PFSense yet, so there's no point in freaking out or anything yet. Let's check on our virtual machine for PFSense. We're going to revert because this upgrade will take too long. It'd be just faster to come back to the snapshot we had made. Rather than updating our OS. The process is the same though. You just have to wait for it. This is going to be faster than pushing our updates. While that's happening though, we will probably see that this network has dropped off, and again, that's okay. All right, let's see if we are back. Yeah, so we're back. All right, we're 10.0.0.1. If you feel like you don't have connectivity, you'll need to test it. So we'll double check and make sure we can ping our 10.0.0.1. Don't forget to use your number pad. And I can ping 10.0.0.1, which is our next leg up, which is our PFSense. So from here, we'll use that web address 10. Okay, I just accidentally searched for 10. That was wrong. 1. And this is our PFSense. At this point in time, the easiest way to complete your lab is to exit full screen mode, show that you have PFSense and Windows 10, take your screenshot, 100 different ways to do that, include it in a Word document, and send it back. If, however, you want to continue further, and I fully encourage this, log into it, and follow your wizard. All right, this PF setup. Also, sort of explore it, see what you can do, see what you find out. Again, if you screw up, you can always go back to PFSense and reset factory defaults. Go back through and reconfigure it, or revert your snapshot, because any changes you make in here affects your Windows or your PFSense install. So with that being done, I know it took a long time. We're waiting on most of the things here. You can fast forward through any of this as you want. It's kind of late to say that anyway. So we'll go ahead and end our session here. Explore PFSense, research PFSense, find out what exactly it can do. And if you look at it, one thing I forgot to mention, is we did see the admin 10005. So there's a log that's been created here, which is fun. So we'll stop our recording now.